I'd like to welcome you all to the 2020 conference, postponed to 2021, of the North American Japanese Garden Association, or NAJGA. My name's Larry Rosenzweig. I've had the pleasure and honor of serving as president of the board for 2019 to 2021, so I'm in the home stretch. We're really excited that you're here, and I want to say it's nice to see so many smiling faces, but of course I can't see too many smiles. But I know they're under there somewhere. We're really excited that you're here and that we can finally return to our in-person events. This is really an historic event, NAJGA's 5th biannual conference that also commemorates our 10th anniversary and the continuation of our mission to connect and support the Japanese garden community. You know, our goal, our mission is really to provide opportunities for all of us in the Japanese garden world to learn and connect. Speaking of connecting, just some housekeeping things. I've been asked to tell you that there is no smoking allowed anywhere on the grounds, please. So good luck to those of you who are smokers. And probably the most important announcement of all, restrooms are out that way in the next building. So we've been working hard to provide opportunities for you to learn and connect with others in the Japanese garden community. For the last 2 years, of course, like everybody else, we've had to get very creative. But we've had a terrific webinar series, our virtual discussions with various groupings within the garden community, increased use of social media, and I'm happy to say that we've not only survived, but in many ways we've really thrived in the last couple of years. And I'd also like to add that that's in no small part due to our terrific NAJGA manager, Marissa Rodriguez. She's been a tremendous help, leader, organizer, and I think as you all know, a warm and welcoming face and personality. So we're delighted to have her. We hope you'll enjoy the program we've planned for you for the next several days. The theme, as you know, is adaptability and resilience, sustainability in Japanese gardens. And, you know, we're going to be talking a lot about how and why Japanese gardens are such effective models of adaptability and resilience. And we're also asking the question of how can we help sustain our Japanese gardens even as they help sustain us. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors who've really helped to make this possible for us. Number one, the Japan Foundation has given us a very generous grant to help support this, especially the AV, and to be able to Zoom and record the conference, much as they did to help to support the webinar series that we did last spring. We also want to thank the Portland Japanese Garden, who are our hosts 3 years ago, but also great supporters of this organization. Kelly Sutherland McLeod Architecture, Skia Living, and Don Miners. And of course, our hosts here today, the San Diego Friendship Garden and Union Bank, Hanatoyo Landscape, and our friend Yamada Takuhiro, and also a new sponsor, TourMate Systems. Those of you who are going on the tours Saturday Sunday, you get to experience their headsets and, communication equipment. So thanks to sponsors. And now I'm honored to introduce my predecessor as president of NAJGA and the executive director, CEO, for more than 20 years of our host, San Diego Japanese Friendship Garden, Luanne Kanzawa.
Thank you, Larry. I just want to take this opportunity as well to thank Larry for, and recognize Larry for successfully managing the organization, NAJGA, while navigating through the pandemic. I mean, this past year, it's been difficult for everyone. And I'm sure those public gardens, you almost had a breakdown like me, but we survived. So that's, but NAJGA remains strong because of you, Larry, and our board support. The board really was supportive of our staff, Marissa, and we pivoted right away doing online programs and things like that. So, so here I want to thank Marissa as well, and she's not here, she's probably running around, and the JFG staff, for really, and also, of course, the program, the conference committee for really working really hard this past few months, planning this conference. Also, I want to just a special thanks to our volunteer, Michiko Kawamura. You can see that nice ikebana arrangement right there. It probably took her half a day to put that together. So I just want to make sure we recognize her. And also at the banquet, we'll have those centerpieces. We also have a volunteer who put that together, and her name is Yumi Rakers. So I want to congratulate NAJGA for your 10th-year anniversary. And I just want to recognize these 3 founding members, Jeanette, Ken, and Steve Bloom. Please stand up so people. So thank you for forming such a wonderful organization and bringing all the gardens together. Thank you very much. We are happy to host this year's conference and excited to finally hold the in-person conference, and I want to welcome you all in San Diego. Enjoy the sunny San Diego, and visit Old Town and other places here. Lots to see. If you want to go to the beaches, let me know. But it's if you have enough time in Balboa Park, here alone, there's so many places to see. So we're surrounded with many museums, Museum of Us, which is now Museum of Men, which is now Museum of Us, Air and Space, a lot of museums. There's this Explorer Pass that they sell. You get to visit all the museums. So just go to the Visitor Center and you can purchase that pass. Lastly, I want to recognize our JFG board. They'll be here today, and Keiji, of course, Keiji, Uesugi, right there, for all their contributions and support. I also want to take a moment to honor Professor Takeo Uesugi. This lower garden, this was his last project before at the garden before he passed away. So I just, he's always going to be in our hearts. So I want to honor him today. And now I'm really happy to introduce my co-chair, former executive director of Earl Byrne Miller Gardens, and the founding member of NAJGA, Jeanette Chalene.
Well, having been involved with NAJGA from the beginning, even before the beginning, I think, for those of you who attended the 2009 conference, this is just really heartwarming to be here to celebrate 10 years of NAJGA and what we all do together. And I also, a shout out to those who are on Zoom with us today who couldn't be here in person. We're just so thrilled to be able to connect again, which for me, I think is one of the most important things, is these opportunities for us to get together and talk to each other, not just at our presentations, which are wonderful, but to make those personal connections with each other, and I think that we learned so much just from doing that. So thank you all for making the big effort to be here, and I know you're going to enjoy yourself. Now, I have a list of people to thank as well. And of course, Luanne Kanzawa needs our great appreciation for the work that she and her team have done here. Hosting a conference is no small feat because you've got to maintain everything else that's going on while you do this work. So thank you very much, Luanne, to you and your board and your staff. And also my thanks to Keiji, Uesugi, who has really been, the backbone of bringing the vision to life here and been such an intelligent and committed person in NAJGA all these years. And of course, we have to remember the staff and the volunteers. We saw a bunch of them today. I hope you'll all take a moment when you interact with the volunteers here today to give them your personal thanks. Nothing we can accomplish is going to happen without these volunteers. And as we grow, I hope that our squadron, what's bigger than a squadron, just to have a large core of volunteers that work with NAJGA, because really, to meet our mission, we really do need many hearts and many hands. Also, I want to acknowledge the Conference Planning Committee that really had their work cut out for them today. They had to plan for 2 contingencies, a live in-person, or actually 3, a live in-person, a fully virtual, or a mixed. So we finally settled in on a mix just in mid-September. Because of the Delta surge, of course, we just sort of had to wait to see how it was all going to work out. So these people have put in triple effort. Again, Luanne, co-chair, Keiji, Uesugi, Kendall Brown, Emi Yoshimura, and Stephen Pitzenberger. Let's give them a round of applause. And super thank you to all the presenters who developed their presentations, got them to us, and we have some of our presenters are going to be presenting through Zoom or recorded presentations, and some will be live. But however their presentation is coming to us, we deeply value the effort and their expertise that they're sharing with us. I also would like to draw your attention to what we're calling the Build Your Own Experience model. We had heard from past conferences that you really enjoy hands-on experiences, so not just a workshop, but an opportunity to sort of dip in, shortly experience something. I hope you've had a chance to look at those, and we've tried to present options for you so that you can kind of dip into different topics at will. Let's see, where am I on all of this? So, and then here's my special duty today, so let me focus and get this right. I'm so thrilled that our keynote speaker today is Naomi Hirahara. Had the pleasure of knowing Naomi and working with her in past. And you will love what she is going to present today, and it will create some wonderful connections for you. If you're from Southern California, maybe you're more familiar with her work, but her work stands as a model regardless of what region that we're talking about, and helps us appreciate the role of the Japanese and Japanese American communities here in the United States and Canada. And our keynote sponsor is Sukiya Living and Don Myers, so thank you very much for making this possible. Now, a few words about Naomi. Naomi is an Edgar Award-winning author of the Mas Arai mystery series, which my book club has read. Very entertaining, and you get some real historical background and some insight in reading them. It features a Los Angeles gardener and Hiroshima survivor who solves crimes. The Japanese translation of her first and seventh Masaru mystery, Hiroshima Boy, was released in August of 2021. You've been busy. Former editor of Rafu Shimpo newspaper, she also produces nonfiction, including Green Makers, Japanese American Gardeners in Southern California, Life After Manzanar, and A Scent of Flowers. They're all very intriguing books, and I highly recommend them. The history of Southern California flower market is particularly interesting to me. I worked in a flower shop while I was putting myself through college. So, it's printed by, oh no, excuse me, let me find here. Her first historical mystery, Clark Division, has been named one of Barnes & Noble's best mysteries of 2021. Congratulations on that. Today she will speak about how the Japanese garden has played a role in the Japanese-American diasporic experience, symbolizing restoration, goodwill, friendship, and peace. During the break and at lunch, she'll be signing Hiroshima Boy and Life After Manzanar. So if you're interested, that's going to take place out here in the courtyard. So please help extend a warm welcome to Naomi. We're so pleased that you're going to be speaking to us today.
As you can see, podiums are not my friend, but we'll make do. I think you could see my face. It's such a thrill to be here in person. I don't know if you knew this, but I got married in the Earl Burns garden. I did, and I probably visited most of your gardens. I know some of you have gardens in your house, so we'll make plans for me to come over. So yes, this is the topic. Let me see if I can handle this. Let's see. Restoring our past, pursuing peace. And I'll be talking about 3 points that I think will kind of illuminate NAJGA's mission as well. Okay, the first one is more of a personal one, Hiroshima Kibe. How many of you know the word Kibe? Yeah, so there's Issei, Nisei, Sansei, and there's this other word, Kibe, which means people who are born here, raised in Japan, and then returned to the United States. And I bet for many of you, the maintenance of your garden or even the creation of your garden involved at least one Kibe. And I'll be talking today, the first section about my father, Isamu Sam Hirahara, and he was a Kibe. The photo on the left is of his, he's on the stool. So he and his 3 older siblings were born in Watsonville, California, which is like the salad bowl, right? Steinbeck country. And because of a weird accident, my great-grandfather, there was a train whistle, and my horse went wild, and unfortunately, my great-grandfather died. And so that precipitated the return of this branch of the family to Hiroshima. And so my father went back as a not went back, but he went to Japan at a very young age. And then the other photo to the right, and that's from my dad's photo album. He's since passed, but he's written carefully my family and then identified, members of his immediate family. This was a photo of him. He was going to go back. This is after World War II, around 1947. So he was one of the early ones to return back to America from Japan. And so the Kibe story is an interesting one, and I wanted to read a few excerpts from my book so you could kind of get into the head of a person like this. And this one is, this is from Hiroshima Boy, and this one outlines Masarai, who is, I follow my father's history very closely, but the character is very different personality. My dad didn't solve crimes. So here Mas returns to Hiroshima, and he's on the train. Who would think about going home after all these years? It was ridiculous, meaningless. Real home was Altadena, California, the place where he became a father, had 2 wives, not at the same time, of course, and helped raise a grandchild. California was open and free with purple mountains and salty brown beaches and dying palm trees and lavender jacaranda trees. Liberated green parrots found refuge in California, squawking as loud as they could on power lines in the early morning hours. Coyotes roamed the streets at night during the occasional downpour. Brown bears bathed in swimming pools, and mountain lions stalked hiking trails. It was a magical place where anything was possible. That was home. But as the train car bounced and click-clacked over rail ties, Mas realized that what was outside these windows was also home. The graceful arches of the Japanese roofs and the color of the foliage on the hills, not midori, American green, but ao, the word used for blue, but also a blue-green. The name of the color of the sky could not be separated from the color of the trees here in Japan. There was also the sense of shibui, the love for negative space, to keep the canvas of life a bit empty to allow something unexpected to permeate it. And the turns of the Japanese garden, how to open up the world by taking a stroll in a different direction. As much as his head and heart tried to reject Japan, his body felt that this was home too. So this is my dad's home. That's actually a photo of me when I was 3. And there was this beautiful flower fields next to my relative's home. And the photo on the left, that's when I went to Tenno in, I think, 2016 to do some research. So there's not much of the family garden that's left, but there's little remnants. So another aspect, and it's in my title about peace, and I didn't know, how Hiroshima would be connected to any of you, but as I came early and took a short little walk right here in the garden, I noticed there was a peach tree, and on the label it said, this peach tree had survived the atomic bomb and had been donated to this garden. So even Hiroshima touches us right this moment. So Shikeien in Hiroshima is a garden there that's been destroyed. The photo in the middle just shows you what was left after the blast. What was really beautiful about the restoration of this garden is cities from all over Hiroshima gave plants to help build it up. And I think there's something really beautiful in that message. And I'm going to read you a very short excerpt. When my character, Mas, encounters Shikeien, he crossed the street to Shikeien. As always, when he needed to think clearly, he gravitated toward green. After paying the admission fee, Mas entered the grounds. His heart was pounding because he remembered running through here when he was maybe 6 or 7. The tall, fat Toro lanterns that today reminded him of stone snowmen. The expansive flat pond and 2 bridges that joined the islands together. One bridge was a brilliant vermilion red with grand black knobs that he and his brothers used to grab hold of. The pond below was stocked with white, orange, and black koi that opened and closed their mouths, begging for food. Farmhouses with thatched straw roofs, stone mushroom chairs, all that was there in faithful restoration. Luckily, he had his daughter Mari's camera in his jean pocket, so he snapped a few photos for old time's sake. When he reached the side of the garden next to Kyobashi River, he stumbled across a large rock engraved with some kind of Japanese writing. It was shaded in darkness, had nothing of the vibrancy of the rest of the garden. He saw 3 rectangular stones leading up to it, and 2 metal vases holding red peonies on the sides as offerings. Reading the old kanji as ire, or comforting the souls of the dead, Moss was surprised to see a sign explaining that a dead body had been found buried from the blast at this spot during the renovation, followed by the discovery of 64 more in the 1980s. At this point, Moss was ready to leave. The hedges, total lanterns, and an energetic koi had sustained him and distracted him from his problems. But this memorial reminded him that it was still Hiroshima. New plants, their roots shallow, could not reverse the damage of radiation and the black rain. Architects and workers had restored the garden to what it looked like 70, 100, or even more years ago. But it was like a superficial mass covering the darkness that was below. So there's another side to gardens as well. Okay, the third point, the forgotten. And I think this is what you all are doing in some places. Like, I know I first met Kendall Brown. We were at Sierra Madre Elementary School, and the students had unearthed the garden and claimed it, and it was really beautiful. And I think the same thing happened with the garden at Roosevelt High School in East LA. So, but this is a garden that you may or may not have heard of. I'm sure most of you have never gone there because today involves some trespassing. This is the garden. How many of you knew that there was a Japanese garden at Dodger Stadium? And I thought I would mention it because of baseball, and it just ended. But so I found out about this garden, and it was actually started. A sports writer from Japan had donated a giant turtle to Walter O'Malley, the owners of the Dodgers at the time, and that started them creating this garden, and I didn't know about it until the daughter of this man, Frank Ego, Kimiko Eko, she taught at El Camino College in the Gardena area. She came up to me after one of my book programs and said, "Hey, do you know about this garden at Dodger Stadium? My dad took care of it." And I go, "What?" So if you know of some secret gardens, like let me know about it. There could be a murder that happens there, but so I thought that was fascinating. So I decided to do more research on it. And there was actually even a story in my own paper that I used to work at. This was after I had left, about the rededication of the garden. But after that time, when I was doing research, there was, unfortunately, it had been ignored. And there was also a sale of the property, and I think this belongs to the person who owns the parking lot. And when I knew I was going to write about Dodger Stadium and one of the mysteries, I went to do some research. And again, here we see no trespassing. But I am not from an esteemed institution. I work for myself. I'm a former reporter. So when I pushed that gate, it opened. So of course that means I am supposed to go in there, which I did. So it was really sad because it was in such disrepair. And there was this memorial there for Korean Americans, and then against the total. So what can I do? I don't have the power to raise a ton of money, or I don't know all the political ramifications. So of course, I put this in a book. And this is Sayonara Slam, and this is Masarai again. He walked faster down the curve of the driveway into the sinkhole of the parking lot. Outside the stadium, which glowed with fluorescent lights, he felt even more alone. If he didn't belong inside with his family, where did he belong? And then he remembered the Japanese garden. What was that Smitty had said? That the garden could be found along a line from home base to Second, formerly parking lot 37, close to where a Union 76 station had once pumped glass. Moss walked in between the parked cars to make his way to a hill shaded by ill-shapen pine and cedar trees. When he finally reached the edge, he came face to face with a tall black iron fence with a sign that was menacing in its simplicity: no trespassing. The gate, which was too high for him to scale, had a simple lock that was probably easy to pick, but he didn't have to even go to such lengths, because with one jiggle, the gate opened. Did Moss even dare? He looked back at the lit stadium, the vortex of life. Was someone watching him as he made his way down here? Were there secret cameras mounted on these light poles? But he saw nothing. No police, no guards. Everything was focused on the game and the spectators, not out here in a dirty corner of the parking lot. Moss quickly climbed through the gate and closed it behind him, no sense attracting attention. There was still some light left, so he was able to see the broken cement stairs that took him up to the dried-out hill. Did they ever bother to water this area? When he finally reached the top, Moss felt weak in the knees. It wasn't the climb that did it. It was what he saw. Dead, uprooted pine trees, stones thrown haphazardly like giant dice, dead grass. If a garden could bleed, this one would be covered in blood. A Japanese stone lantern, was the only evidence that something artful had once lived here. It was large, maybe 10 feet tall. These things were not cheap. Moss knew from acquiring smaller versions for the, quote, Oriental, end quote, gardens some of his customers had requested in the past. With the fallen trees behind it, the total seemed like a lone survivor in a war zone. Sabishi, Moss felt the loneliness creep in his bones. Who had ravaged, or perhaps more appropriately, ignored this Japanese garden? He stumbled around the bleak area one more time while the sky quickly lost light. He discovered a cement monument base in a corner and could barely make out the letters on its plaque. Something about the 100-year anniversary of immigration from Korea. Did the Koreans even know that such a recognition was here? Moss then heard the crunch of dead branches up the hill. It wasn't surprising that creatures invaded this place when the sun went down. And when he saw headlights flash on the cars in the distance, Moss knew his exit was overdue. But I want to thank all of you, because I think you're seeking to maintain the gardens that are beautifying this country, and and if you don't, this is what happens. And this is the last point on incarceration and freedom. And of course, I'm talking specifically about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. And I think, NAJGA, you went to Manzanar, I believe, to look at the restoration of the Japanese gardens. I don't know if anyone from the Goto families here or anyone staff of the Manzanar, but they're doing an amazing job there. This photo was taken a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, with Merritt Park, which was known as a pleasure park. And I have to admit, some anthropologists are very strict. They don't want anything to be recreated. So there's this big debate. But I do have to admit, they also have recreated like a basketball, court. And there's something about it that's extremely poignant. And I think it's because the people who behind barbed wires were trying to create something, either a diversion for children or some kind of beauty. And I think it's very touching. What was mentioned was scent of flowers and also green makers. So this was from my research for those two books. On the left is the Yokomizo family. He was known in San Fernando as the king of the vernaculus before the forced removal. So he told his family members to bring, seeds of vernaculus with them to Manzanar. And a lot of the flower people actually were instrumental in the victory gardens in camp, as well as at working on a lot of these gardens within camp. One of them was Francis Miyasaku Uematsu. I don't know if anyone from Descanso is here, but Uematsu had been the one, he had been raising all those camellias that Manchester Bodhi of Descanso eventually acquired. And Descanso has been very transparent this year about saying that it wasn't necessarily like really obtained for a fair market price, and there was a little bit of complicated and contentious situation. So they're going to have an exhibit there, I believe in this starting this month, kind of talking about the truth behind the acquisition. So, but Uematsu brought in plants, and this person Shoji Nagumo at top, he is what in the Southern California community of old is known as like the grandfather of gardening, maintenance gardening, and he was a true believer. He, many people like my own father, they got into gardening because there was kind of a halo effect. Some people are known for, you must be good, smart, so you're a doctor, but like if you're Japanese, you must know how to grow plants. And so my father was one of those who benefited. But Shoji really loved to garden, and he believed that it was good for your health, and maybe he was very prescient in that way, especially during these pandemic times, about how gardening can really heal. And he was incarcerated in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, and he insisted that something be grown for the children in camp because he felt they shouldn't live in stark situations. And also, recently on Westways, I had written a story about a stone man, Rose Okado. He's not necessarily a garden maker and not a Japanese garden maker. He was a devout Catholic, but that obelisk, I mentioned Ireto earlier, but there's also this Ire kind of message that's on the this memorial at Manzanar, and it was created by this Catholic Rose Okado. He did the stonework, but the writing was done by a Buddhist minister, Nagatomi Sensei. So it really reflects kind of this meeting of religions and faith. And the photo on the right is Kado really liked to do grotto work, Italian grotto work. And this is at a Catholic church near my house in Altadena. And he's also done some amazing things in a Catholic cemetery in Culver City. So this is kind of the end of my talk, and I just wanted to close it we're back at Shukkein, we're back in Hiroshima. And I don't think this is revealing anything. I didn't read anything criminal from this book, so I don't think there's there's a slight spoiler, but it's okay. But I'm gonna. So one thing, while Mas is in Hiroshima, he's trying to find a way of properly disposing of his close friend, also Akibe, ashes. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen at your gardens, but it's symbolic, okay? So, so this is from the last part of Hiroshima Boy. From the police station, he proceeded a few blocks to the place he had been a few days earlier, Shukkein Garden. A group of seniors, bonnets on the women and white golf caps on the men, waited by the entrance, offering docent-led tours of the grounds. Mas, of course, declined their invitation. He knew the general direction of where he wanted to go. He walked toward the river where the stone memorializing the souls of the dead was placed. He remembered seeing something in the general area, and there he found it. It was a Buddha in a low-standing display box, barely visible through a grid. Interpretive signage in both Japanese and English explained that the wooden Buddha had survived a flood in the area 200 years ago. This one and 2 others came floating down the Kyobashi River to the garden and then were housed in a special altar within the property. Then came the bomb and the destruction of the 2 larger Buddhas, but this smaller one, a couple of feet high, survived. Mas placed his face right next to the grid of the box so he could clearly see this Buddha's bulging eyes and prominent nose. The statue's mouth was half open, as if he were protesting his situation. You survived flood and Pikadon, atomic blast, Mas declared to the Buddha. This had to be as good a place as any. He opened up his new suitcase and took out the bag of ashes. Removing the gardening twine from his bag, he sprinkled some of haruo around the altar so that visitors looking for the Buddha would also get a whiff of his friend. He then went to the riverbank, which was cordoned off from the garden by a 3-foot fence. A strong breeze kicked up, blowing through the pine branches. Mas bowed for a moment and then raised the open bag high toward the river, finally setting the ashes free. So that's the end of my talk. I just want to briefly say, I only brought a few books. Hiroshima Boy, I have 3. It came out in Japanese this year, so I have 3 of them as well as Life After Manzanar. But these are 2, I don't have these with me, but if you're interested in green makers, and both of these are limited in supply. If you look on Amazon, I think they're up for $500. But of course, my husband goes, look how much these are. And it's like, it's not really that value unless someone agrees to pay for it. But anyway, it looks, I don't know. So, but green makers, you could contact the Southern California Gardeners Federation. They do still have some books, and a scent of flowers you can call the flower market. But thank you very much for having me, and I hope you have a good conference. Is there any Q&A? Or maybe you guys want to stand up and move around. Oh, okay. Or if your garden has any Hiroshima connections, or maybe I would love to know, or any connections to the World War II incarceration experience. Yes. The Hiroshima connection. Do you have something from Hiroshima there? Yes. Uh-huh. That's really beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it'd be neat if we could do something related to that in our gardens, yeah. Oh, right. Are you from Honolulu? Are you from Honolulu? I'm from Hilo. Oh, you're from Hilo? Okay. Okay, so I find the term incarceration to be extreme. Please explain the debate internment versus incarceration. Yeah, this is a really debated, and also the word concentration camp is something people have very strong opinions of. If you look at, there's a Japanese American encyclopedia called Densho, and if you look at that, they kind of explain the terms. I guess some of us feel like in terms of internment, or because there were many camps. There were these 10, I call them mass incarceration camps. Like, just if you were of Japanese ancestry, if someone like me, no crime committed, I would have been put into that camp. So that's, I guess, whereas there were other ones that were more alien, there were more, I guess, quote, legal. There were alien internment camps. So if you take a very literal kind of meaning, if you look it up in the dictionary, or look at kind of military or those kind of sources, they would just use the word internment from the internment of aliens. So I guess that's why I do, and it's been a process for me too to really grab hold, but I really think that incarceration is more of a proper terminology. And I think it's also because when people hear internment, they think, oh, you know, maybe these people did do something, you know. Internment, that was for their safety, that was for our safety, without really thinking about these, you know, 2/3 of these people were actually born in America. And if you weren't, if you were of Japanese ancestry, you couldn't even become naturalized, you know, whereas Italians and other people could, those immigrants could become citizens. So, yeah, so that's why I adhere to that particular term. I miss Moss. Will you bring him back, please? It ended with 7 books, and I followed him from age 69 to 86, and I really wanted to close well, and so that's why I didn't want to keep, you know, I'm sure you've seen TV shows, you know, and they're going, why did they keep making these? You know, it needs to end, you know, and I never wanted someone to wish Moss ill will, so. At the Japanese tea garden in San Francisco, we have ginkgo trees that were brought to us through Green Legacy Hiroshima. These are seedlings of trees that survived the blast in Hiroshima. So that's really beautiful. And what are you working on now? So my book, Clark and Division, takes place in 1944 Chicago, and I'm doing a follow-up right now, and it's called Evergreen, and it's set in Los Angeles in 1946. But in my future, I'm planning to write about Pasadena in the early 1900s, and the Japanese artisans and Japanese gardens will definitely be a part of it. So we'll see what I do with it. But anyway, if there's no other questions, thank you very much.
I am Stephen Pitzenbarger. I am the garden supervisor at the Japanese Tea Garden in San Francisco, and we have an illustrious panel here this morning. Our 3 presenters here are Kendall Brown. Kendall Brown is the professor of Asian art history at Cal State Long Beach, and he holds a PhD in art history. He publishes actively in several areas of Japanese art and on Japanese-style gardens in North America, and he was a co-founder of NAJGA and a past president. We've also got Luanne Kanzawa, the executive director here at the Japanese Friendship Garden, and she has an MA in nonprofit leadership and management and a BS in psychology. She's the past board president of NAJGA and a co-chair of NAJGA's 2021 conference, and she serves on various boards and committees, including the Balboa Park Cultural Partnership and the Balboa Park Committee. Keiji Uesugi is an expert of Japanese gardens in North America. He studied at Kyushu University, received his MLA at Cal Poly Pomona, and worked over 10 years with his father, Dr. Takeo Uesugi, as well as experts Dr. Makoto Nakamura and Tokushiro Tamane. His professional work includes the Huntington Library Japanese Garden and the Japanese Friendship Garden of San Diego. He teaches landscape architecture at Cal Poly Pomona. And who is going first? All right, please welcome Ken Brown.
Microphone perfectly positioned. Thank you, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Naomi, for a wonderful talk. We did meet, 30 years ago, and Naomi mentioned the Dodgers Stadium Garden, which was built under the O'Malleys, but when Frank McCourt boo or hiss, took over the Dodgers maybe 10, 15 years ago. He did briefly try, he at least posed for a picture there. And he does like Japanese gardens because at his estate in Massachusetts, Sada Uchiyama is in the process of building a large multi-acre garden. So although the one in Dodger Stadium so far has been abandoned and forgotten, Japanese gardens being built as we speak, out of those legacies. I'd like to see that, think that's where he was inspired, the Dodger Stadium garden, to inspire him to build one at his own home. When the planning committee was meeting here about 2 years ago, it struck us that we're in a garden built by an important figure, Takeo Uesugi, and that we should acknowledge his role here. Like Luanne and I'm sure Keiji, when I'm here, I still feel his presence. And I'll end by showing a photo of him working on this garden. And I think that his career path really takes us to the themes of this conference: resilience, adaptability, sustainability, and the kind of unstated themes, that sense of joy and beauty as resilience that pushes us forward. So it's a little daunting to speak with people who grew up with him and worked with him. These are the impressions of a distant observer. Recently, one of the gardens that Takeo Uesugi built was featured in a magazine. Was it Esquire, I think, or Vanity Fair? Vanity Fair, with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, posing in the garden. And I know Dwayne Johnson has recently come out and talking about some mental health issues and depression, and I hope that a Japanese garden would bring him a sense of solace. But that very staged photo that you're looking at, I think, is not the kind of solace and adaptability and solace through sustainability, and that sense of gardens not as a product, but as a process. So I want to talk about, as at least I understand it, Takeo Uesugi's own journey. And a lot of what I'm saying comes from a very long interview my wife and I did with him, about an 8-hour interview in 2004, where we spent a whole day looking at the garden at his Cal Poly campus and talking about his life and pushing through to his feelings about gardens. So as I say, we're spending 3 days here walking the paths that Takeo Uesugi made, and I think it behooves us to begin by learning about his career path, his life, the life that he walked. In my theory, his gardens project his values as a head minister in the Tenrikyo Church, and are shaped by his life experience. And that experience, as Naomi talked about, was the immigrant experience. He wasn't a Kibei, but somebody who comes to America as a student, back to Japan, then comes again as a professional, raising a family. So his past and his present come together, and his future come together through gardens. And in my reading, his gardens are about joy and about collaboration. And there are, of course, expressions of his immigrant experience, which is many things, but maybe the key idea is flexible adaptation, the balancing of divergence. And Naomi, again, her talk about that sense of your mind and your body being a little bit at odds, but a garden is a place where you can bring harmony. So, to go very quickly, in his brief bio sketch, he was the youngest of a family of several children, I think 5, the youngest brother. He had 13 generations of garden makers in Osaka behind him, but his own father had, aged 29, left the garden making business to be a minister in the Tenrikyo Church. And so in his own life, Takeo Uesugi brought together both that garden history and the immediate previous generations of the church ministry. And I think that when you understand that, his gardens take on a new light, almost literally, the sense of the open sky, the blue sky reflecting off the water. There's not gardens with a lot of large trees that he built, and I think that openness and that brightness is very much part of his aesthetic, although often unvocalized. He wanted to first be a chemist, he told me, but at Osaka Prefectural University, where he got his bachelor in science in 1962, the professor there in landscape architecture, Kubo Tadashi, encouraged him to pursue horticulture, which he did. And Kubo Tadashi is an important figure in Japanese garden history, especially in North America and here in Southern California. Luanne talked about going to see some of the sites. You can go to SeaWorld and get a Japanese garden, because the original SeaWorld, designed in 1963 by Kubo Tadashi, for fully 1/3 of it was the Murata Pearl Village, which is still there in remnants. Kubo goes on to build gardens in Lethbridge, Canada, and University of Alberta Devonian Garden. So Uesugi then matriculates to Kyoto University, the School of Forestry, the Landscape Architecture program, where the wide range of professors included both traditionalists and modernists, such as Okazaki Akira and Nakamura Makoto, most importantly, who will be honored here tonight. Some of you might have been here at the International Association of Japanese Garden Conference in 2010, and Nakamura Makoto and Takeo Uesugi were placing boulders together. And the last time I saw Takeo, in fact, he and his old sensei friend were placing boulders in that stream. And Nakamura Makoto is another important figure for Japanese gardens in America. The garden he built at Dawes Arboretum outside Columbus, Ohio in 1963 was really a kind of foundational garden about translation of Japanese garden idioms and ideas, practices and principles, not necessarily styles, to North America. And I show you on the bottom of that slide some of that garden. And in reading the records that Nakamura sensei made when he was at Dawes Arboretum, he went to talk to school children around Ohio, and he introduced himself as Mac, you know, taking his name and sort of adapting it to America. And his gardens very much are, he was really trying to, I think, evoke not so much centuries of Japanese garden style, but use the principles from those centuries and build gardens that talked about as kind of an American Midwestern sensibility. And I think that comes through in those slides of the renovated garden. Sorry, keep going the wrong way. Takeo Uesugi's career, while he's in Kyoto and still in contact with his old professor from Osaka Prefectural University, Dr. Kubo, took an important turn. He was introduced to the famous Berkeley professor and writer on garden history, Garrett Ekbo, and together with his professors Kubo and Nakamura and Koichi Kobayashi, who has attended many of these events, but not this year, they translated Ekbo's very famous books, Landscape for Living and Landscape We See. And this relationship with Ekbo would become important in Uesugi's life. Then his old professor Kubo invited him back down to Osaka, take the train, the Hankyu line perhaps, and visit Osaka Prefectural University, where the famous Bay Area landscape architect Lawrence Halprin was giving lectures. And Halprin invited Uesugi to the Bay Area to work in his office. Halprin had just got big commissions for designing the landscape around all the BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit stations. And so Takeo Uesugi entered the Masters in Landscape Architecture program at UC Berkeley, getting his MLA on urban space, not on Japanese garden history, in 1967. And when I interviewed him in 2004, Takeo Uesugi spoke to me about the huge impact. He said of all of his professors had a big impact on him, but maybe that of Halprin was the largest. And he said Halprin was making flow spaces, and the flow spaces shaped the environment to articulate human movement and to activate human sentiment. And Takeo said, and I'll refer to him by his given name because it was a kind of personal moment, he said, that's what I wanted to do. And I see that's all of my gardens are about those things. And historically, when he would have worked in Halprin's office, Halprin was working on the Nicollet Mall in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And as there's a quote that I've given on the screen from it, we think of, last conference we were up in Portland, and on the walking tour, we went to the Keller Fountain, and we think about Halprin Gardens as big waterfalls, the FDR Memorial in DC, for example. But as Takeo Uesugi experienced Halprin's design, it was really about people and paths. And this is a quote actually from Foundation for Landscape Architecture on Halprin's idea at Nicollet, when Uesugi would have been working for him on motation, choreographing human movement through space, which creates nodes of social gathering. And I think at most, not all, he designed so many gardens, but most of Takeo Uesugi's most successful gardens accomplish exactly what his mentor Halperin was trying to do. Takeo Uesugi goes back from, well, he had actually been also interning with Royston Hanamoto Beck and Abbey in the Bay Area, a large firm, and then Paul Friedberg in New York City. So a very rich and diverse experience with American modernists, coming out of also 13 generations of garden designers in Japan. He returns in 1968 to Kyoto University, and if you know anything about the student movement around the world, 1968, 69, 70 was a dynamic period. And Takeo spoke with great emotion about, and looking at the slide in the upper right, of as a student, he was the so-called joshu, the lead assistant for Professor Nakamura, and there was a student strike and demonstrations and wanting to connect these discordant groups in society at the time. He also designed, together with Robert Murase, another Berkeley-trained student who was in Japan for many reasons, and avoiding the American draft was one of them. Uesugi and Murase worked on a large, important project, the landscape around the Japanese pavilion at the 1970 Expo World Exposition. I think that this is really, and I show you some historic photos of it on the left, this was probably more of a Murase project, because if you know Bob Murase's projects in Portland, and there's a couple of them on the screen that we saw in the conference talk 3 years ago, that Murase was very much a modernist, really wanting to adapt Japanese garden styles to very modern idioms. And I don't think this was Takeo Uesugi's intention at all. In fact, he comes out, gets a job teaching, which he would do for the rest of his life at Cal Poly Pomona, teaching landscape architecture, and forms his own firm, Takeo Uesugi Associates Incorporated. And one of his first projects really launches his career as a Japanese garden designer, which he in some ways didn't intend to do. He told me it was sort of an accident. In fact, his mentor, Ekbo, had warned him specifically against designing Japanese gardens. But when Takeo designed a garden for David and Sandy Swedlow at their home in Newport Beach, it got such great publicity, and the patrons enjoyed it so much that he decided, in fact, that this was a career path he would take, building gardens in the Japanese idiom. And the press was great. As you can see, this article written a few years later, Uesugi has treated garden, and this is a small pool area in front between the parking lot and the house. Uesugi has treated the garden as a continuous open space, subtly differentiated by meticulously detailed junctions and modulations. And that's that sense of flow, of as you walk along the path from the gate to the patio area, or sit on the raised deck and look at a pond on one side and the pool, or even as you swim on the pool and get out on the steps that lead you up past stones. And the proof was in the pudding. The Swedlows really loved this garden. And in another article, David Swedlow, who you see in the red, he was also a collector of Japanese netsuke, he and his wife, which is how I knew them. But David Swedlow talked about the garden and how it brought their family together, their children, their grandchildren. Quote, "Since we feel the garden is so much a part of us, we extend our lifestyle into the garden. It really gets a lot of use. It's probably sacrilegious in Japanese thinking, but it's practical for many children grandchildren to use our garden." And you can see the photo that brings that out. So that, again, that Halperin idea, the flow spaces that activate human enjoyment. And this kind of backyard pool garden would become one of the styles in Takeo Uesugi's career. This is one of my own personal favorites. It's a small garden by him at the Costa Mesa City Hall with a very kind of off-putting modernist building and then a parking lot. And he got the commission by some landscape builders, the Takata brothers. And then and it was a small intro space, and he has 3 paths that pull you around 2 small mounds past a little pond with beautiful rockwork. And and this really emphasizes a kind of gentle movement of employees and not just city workers, but anybody who wants to go to City Hall to get a permit or something to sort of soften the building. And so I think he was really thinking about the human experience of landscape more than the design. The other part point that I made in the introduction was the sense of close or sincere collaboration. And he worked on the garden with Glenn Koyama, who he would work with throughout his career, and Kinya Hira, who was an important early first curator of the Portland Japanese Garden, who had then moved to Southern California. So these partnerships, these friendships, the sense of doing things together, that trotting that path, not alone, not for your ego, but for building a garden and building friendships and building human experience, which links them. We're going to take a tour of this on Sunday morning, bright and early, thank you, 5 minutes, San Diego Tech Center, so I don't need to talk about it here. But this is a large office park garden, and the original brochure, when it was called the Nyman Tech Center, talks, I think, about the basic values central. Individual worth and dignity through an integrated and efficiently functioning environment. And we'll walk through it on Sunday morning. It's changed a little. There's a core kind of traditional garden with a restaurant now, a beer pub in the middle. There was a Japanese restaurant. And then the garden is really about paths. And it's about this articulated, thoughtful, sensitive movement. And one imagines you're not trotting these paths alone, but with your co-workers as you walk to and from work. And so it's about this sense of pleasure and mystery and discovery and the journey, quite literally. And I think the slides bring that out. And of course, this journey fostered, and this was again clear to Jack Nyman, who built it, to restore a sense of balance and creative energy through a Japanese garden at an office park 40 years ago. And this is a very little known project. It's just north of the Chicago Botanic Garden, Bannockburn Office Plaza, developed for Alan Pressman. The same idea. So this becomes another part of his design. And then quickly to sort of finish off a few later gardens, I hope I've established the philosophy and the design intent in Takeo Uesugi's garden, but paths and streams that people flow like water and connect like water. I think of the Hindu metaphors. We're all individual consciousness that seeks to flow together and merge into the stream. And his symbolism here was from Issei to Nisei to even Kibe, where the stream diverges and then flowing together into a pond at the end. So flow space at his own campus, Cal Poly Pomona, the Aratani Garden there, which is about moving through space and flowing together as students on campus. And here is a photo at the very end of his career, building with his old professor from 1964. And here he is in 2014, 50 years later, my math isn't very good, decades, a half century later, working together, building that flow space, the streams and pathways. Does it work? Are we having a good time? Will we have a good time? Time will tell. But I just went online before I finished this presentation and just at random looked San Diego Friendship Garden Wedding and found this. This was the photographer's website, ABM Photography, Elizabeth and William's Wedding Photography. And it shows them following that path, coming together on the bridge, the family watching, walking off. I think Takeo Uesugi's career goals were well realized. Thank you.
So I remember in 1999 when I first joined the garden, it was just a 2-acre garden. And everything, the trees short, everything's gray, the ground's not covered. And then the fishes are still small in the koi pond. And I was talking to a board member, isn't it amazing? So pretty. And then I'm thinking, yeah, it is pretty. I said, but it's just so gray, right? And then I have no understanding of a Japanese garden or even appreciate it. But then when I met Takeo, he explained everything around the garden, the symbolism and what it represents. And all of a sudden, I just appreciate the garden. It's just so different, the way I interpret it when I first saw it. So, I'm sure all of you have been to, with the garden affiliation, and you know how to appreciate a Japanese garden. But on our Free Tuesday, we have people coming here, they just walk right in, and no appreciation at all. So I just want to point it out. But anyway, so I came here in 1999. I was a teenager, so you can calculate my age. Teenager, remember, teenager. But anyway, The garden, as you know, is situated in Balboa Park. And Balboa Park is considered as a destination in San Diego. So the reason why it's so we get about 12 to 15 million visitors. And it's considered a cultural district and historic landmark in San Diego. The reason for that, because Balboa Park hosted the Panama Exposition in 1915. So I want to just kind of share the history of the garden. So the garden opened in 1990. That's the first phase. But our history ties back to that 1915 exposition. So the Yokohama sister city, our sister city here, they're instrumental in the development of the Japanese garden. So after the exposition ended in 1917, the Japan Exhibit Association gave the building to the city, and in turn, the city handed the building to the Asakawa family. So the Asakawa family took care of that tea pavilion for so many years and opened it to the public, serving tea and ice cream. So they're popular for that among sailors during payday. In fact, I learned the mom probably started the green tea. So she just mixed the green tea powder with the vanilla. And so that's what I was told, but I'm not sure if that's true. But anyway, so that her history goes back in 1915. So the family ran the tea pavilion until the outbreak of the World War in World War II. So between 1945 to 1954, the tea house was closed. So it was left to deteriorate and eventually dismantled to make a room for the children's zoo, which is now the new children's zoo. So then years passed, the San Diego, Yokohama sister city, they decided to rebuild the Japanese garden from that tea house. So Saburo Morooka, he's a founding member of the Japanese garden, also the Yokohama sister city, walked around Balboa Park, saw this empty land right here, and said, why don't we build a Japanese garden here? So it's huge land. And by the way, we're the second largest land in Balboa Park. The zoo is the first. So he found this big land, and we're fortunate that he found it. And so then 1977, the Fong and the LaRocca Associates and Professor Takeo Uesugi were picked to design the JFG master plan. So the final master plan was unveiled in 1979 and formed the Japanese Friendship Garden Society organization. So as you can see here, the project, the phasing came into 8 phases. So it has the A, B, and C on the third. And the total cost back then for the upper and the lower is 11 million. This lower garden, we spent 15 million alone, just the development of this lower garden. But imagine back then, for the whole entire acres, there were, the total estimate cost is only over 11 million. So around 1981, our board, the Japanese Garden Board, started to formally negotiate this 50-year lease with the city. So we got a 50-year lease with the city of San Diego for this land that we're sitting on right now. So then, in 1984, Professor Yokoyama and Takeshi Nakajima, under the direction of the Yokohama, were selected to implement the master plan. So the Kurano Associates was retained as the project manager. Around 1986, this garden was named Sankeien by landscape architect Takeshi Nakajima and supported by Yokohama Mayor Michikazu Saigo. So they donated that 4,000-pound Sankeien entrance stone. You see it at the front gate, and it's a replica of a gift from the late mayor who died the same year when we opened the garden in 1990. So we opened the garden in 1990, and we only have that back then, the first phase, the exhibition hall, which is upstairs. So then moving on to phase 2, around 1994, 1997, so we asked Takeo to design phase 2. It's pretty much the completion of the upper garden. So the phase 2 included the tea pavilion. So you can see on the far left, that's the admin building made of 2 trailers put together. And when you look at it right now, it looks like one single building. Because there's this thing with the city, we're not supposed to build building in the park. And so we said, no, this is just a temporary building. So see, we're using 2 trailers. So that's the purpose why we're doing the 2 trailers. We did the 2 trailers. So then We reopened second phase in 1999. Back then, when I came in 1999, our budget was $200,000 with one staff, one gardener, one facility staff, and 2 part-time visitors. So I'm all over the place. Sometimes I'm at the front gate selling tickets, so it's a really small staff back then. So we're growing and growing, so we're moving on to phase 3. So now we're in phase 3. So under the leadership of Dennis Uesugi, construction began in 2010. How many of you were here in 2010 during the International Garden Symposium? Only a few. But thank you for the free labor. So you did, the dry waterfall. So I hope you get to appreciate it now because that was your work in 2010. So Dennis was the one who oversaw the whole construction. And around the spring 2013, Dr. Inamori, our one and only donor, big donor, gave us $3 million. So he gave us $3 million to complete this building and the restroom and the kitchen building. But we didn't have enough money. He said, well, that's still not enough to complete the lower garden. So our president contributed a significant amount to complete the whole garden. So that was Dennis Uesugi. So we're very grateful. So, Professor Takeo Uesugi designed the whole lower garden master plan and worked with Kotaro Nakamura, who designed this building. The grand opening of the Inamura Pavilion was held in 2015. The lower garden expansion, so include this building, the restroom, the cherry grove, waterfall, the bridges, and the azalea. So then what happens when we open 2015? We grew again. So since the reopening of the expansion, our visitors, we get about 300,000 visitors every year. And then we also partner with Bubble Park, because of the institutions, and we give out thousands of tickets to our constituents. Majority of our visitors are tourists, about 75%. And our operating budget now is $3 million. And so we expanded our staff. We currently have 25 staff. About 44% of our staffing are maintenance staff, garden staff, and facility staff. And then 33% are, the admin and programming. As you can see, we really invest on our garden staff because it's such a huge garden. So in 2021, we also, this year, we receive our museum accreditation by the American Alliance of Museums. So probably you're asking, how do we sustain ourselves? So our main source of income, definitely garden admission, a little bit from programs, but we do a lot of weddings, as Ken showed you. We do about 60 weddings a year, both upper and lower, so they're separate. And we have a small gift shop. When we're not using this room, this half of the building is the gift shop. So, but we also receive funding from individual donations, bequests, and grants, and we have a small endowment. And then any special projects like the bridges or any additional, like the donor board or ticket booth, they're all funded through grants. So in order to cut down expenses, we do everything like small construction projects in-house. Benancio is here, is right there. I want to give Benancio credit because he does all the construction work. And the reason why Benancio is very skillful, because during the expansion of this lower garden, he was the foreman of that company that we hired to do it, so he knows very well the lower garden. We also utilize our volunteers who help us a lot with, pulling weeds, trimming trees, composting, and others. So it's really a big help for us. And of course, partnership is very important. As I mentioned earlier, we are in Bubble Park, surrounded by many institutions. So we are a member of the Bubble Park Cultural Partnership and the Koi Club, and you'll hear from Jack throughout during this conference, maintains our koi, and they acquire our quality koi, that their organization. And we have other partnerships, the Yokohama Sister City, and then the rest, they provide programs and classes for the garden. So how do we maintain friendship or engage our community? staying relevant within the community. So we do a lot of exhibitions. So we partner with both local and international artists, as well as the collectors, to provide exhibitions. We implement rotating exhibitions and workshops relating to the exhibitions. JFG we have our own artifacts, as well as we loan our artifacts, and we do pop-up museums, outside the garden. And so we have about 900 artifacts and then 500 living collection. In addition to exhibition, our festivals are very popular. The Cherry Blossom alone, we get about 15,000 people. And then we partner with 25 organizations and businesses for that event alone. Like, for example, we partner with Setting Sun Sake, and then we hold our annual Sake Day. And then the Toro Nagashi and Shijin Shiki. So it's been really popular, our events. From this building, the viewing deck, during March, you can see everything out there all pink. So people really come to the garden because of our cherry trees. It looks different. It's amazing. And of course, many of you are familiar with the wellness program. I'm sure the public gardens, many of you who work at the public gardens already offer yoga and meditation. But in addition to that, we also do exhibitions, lectures, and demonstrations relating to the wellness. And especially during the pandemic, it was just a virtual lecture, but we're surprised many attended our mental health lecture. And gardens are a perfect place to promote and educate people about environmental friendly practices and green programs. So we partner with the City of San Diego Environmental Services and Solana Center to train employees about recycling and composting. We also provide demonstrations about beekeeping, composting. We are really committed to increasing the public awareness regarding the benefits of green practices and composting. We recycle at least 50% of our trash from events and convert 75% of our green waste to mulch or compost. A majority of our waste comes from green waste that's produced during garden maintenance. With our current 50 composting bins, we are able to reduce the cost on waste and removal for fertilizer. So the lower garden expansion project does not end there. So we continue to develop the lower garden by adding new features and elements such as the bridges, the peace trees, and the stone lanterns. In 2017, we received this donation from a collector. So when we received it, it was broken into pieces. As you can see, the head and they're apart. So we don't even know if we can restore the statue, but we receive it anyway because of its historical significance. So then we receive support from a foundation and the state and the county to restore the Buddha and build an outdoor exhibit. So Keiji designed, we call it the Garden of Enlightenment. And I hope you have the opportunity to just go there and then just sit and appreciate it in that surrounding. And so that's our recent project that we opened. And so the next project that you will witness during this conference, we're working with David Sipos to build the Azumaya and additional bridge. So there will be a boulder placing demonstration during the conference, and I hope you get to participate on that. So what happened, whether we like it or not, we have to consider the fact that we went through the pandemic and what happens after that. So definitely we see a lot of changes, even in the museum world and operations. So it's been 2 years since the lockdown, and it was challenging back then. But I realized Japanese gardens, how nimble we are, that we can easily do things, and to accommodate the needs of the community. Back then, we donated 500 wellness bags consisting of protective supplies as well as information about our free virtual programs, and we donated it to many organizations, San Diego Humane Society, hospitals, and then we extended our venue to local artists and organizations and farms so they can utilize the garden to promote their services and product. We also hosted CSA pickup for any for an easy access to organic, locally grown produce. In addition, we hosted the holiday market event by providing space for the local artists and businesses to promote their products during our Free Tuesday. So we kept the public engaged by implementing challenge projects such as creating 1,000 cranes to promote resilience during the pandemic, and organized a community exhibition entitled Iyashi Exhibition, which means healing. So what did you do to create, what did you create in the time of coronavirus? So we received about 50 proposals from various backgrounds, ages, and skills, sharing their stories during the time when they were on lockdown. So we did an exhibition for that. So the pandemic and the historical events provided us an opportunity to rethink and revise our operations and programming. Like many others, we quickly adapted and creatively responded with alternative ways to offer services beyond our mission. So we implemented our Free Tuesday Wellness Days. In Bubble of Heart, museums are required to open for free once a month. And a lot of museums, they always complain, a lot of people, they're destroying our museum, they're just using the restroom. So I look at it in a positive way. I said, here we are, people are coming into the garden, so why don't we do something to welcome them? So we started theming our Free Tuesdays. We received funding from CDC and IMLS. So this next 3 months, we theme our Free Tuesdays, Free Tuesday Wellness Days. So we are offering free vaccine, flu vaccine, COVID, and booster shots. And then we have wellness activities for free to the public, and then promoting any wellness activities to our constituents. Thank you. So in closing, and Keiji is going to talk about the design of the garden, but I want to play this video created by our building architect to tell you more about the building, that everything that we do here, it's about bringing the community to the garden and providing a safe space for everyone. I'll play this video by Kotaro Nakamura.
This pavilion is located within the Japanese French Garden, which is located within the historic Balboa Park. The entire Japanese garden is 11 acres. The location of the building is controlled by the landscape architect. The building becomes just a backdrop of this garden environment. Actually, landscape architects moved this building several times, and that was a new experience. How do you design a Japanese building in this context? The style of the building is called the Sukiya style. We try not to hide anything. So that's where the honesty comes in, where the wood meets the metal, metal meets the concrete, concrete meets the deck. All that is exposed instead of hiding it. Wabi-sabi is very authentic Japanese sense of beauty. It has to do with sense of time. So this building will change. For example, this is Alaskan yellow cedar. Eventually, it will become gray, and that's a sense of time. And we allow the nature to take its own course without resisting it or controlling it. The function of the pavilion is to create a gathering space. It's a sense of community we are trying to create. That creates the familiarity with Japanese culture within the context of American culture, and that create a friendship between the two.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Stephen, for your kind introduction. Thank you to my co-presenters, Kendall Brown and Luanne Kanzawa. And thank you to NAJGA for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful conference here. It's my pleasure and honor to share the story of the design process for the Japanese Friendship Garden. I'd also like to thank Kelly Sutherland McLeod, who is the architect for the Cultural Education Center we'll talk about in a moment. Give her notice less than 24 hours ago to discuss the process that's going through as well. Thank you very much. And just as a quick introduction, I'm a California licensed landscape architect. I have continued the office my father started called Takeo Uesugi and Associates back in 1970 when he began it. Various works that I have been working on include the Roosevelt High School Garden of Peace in Los Angeles. Naomi Hirahara was kind enough to mention that garden, and it's my pleasure to share the story that garden's legacy continues. It was originally built by Japanese American students at Roosevelt High School before World War II. It had gone through some various renovations, but due to the construction of new STEM buildings at Roosevelt High School, they need to move the garden, and I was part of that whole reimagining of where that garden can go and what that garden could be. So I tried to respect as much as possible what the essence of the Japanese American students who built the original garden was in terms of how that embodies the experience of those Japanese American students back in the time. And in the early 2000s as well, they were brought back because they never received their diplomas during World War II. Because they were put in the concentration camps, and so they were brought back, and that renewed the name as a Garden of Peace at Roosevelt High School. So I took that very seriously in terms of how I approached the garden design there. But also I've been involved with the Coachella Valley History Museum, Japanese Memorial Garden that celebrates the history of the first generation Issei farmers out in Coachella Valley. It's a very fascinating story of the Japanese American farmers out there and how they had this cooperative farming with white farmers and also Armenian American farmers out there as well. So it's a very fascinating story out there, and it's a pleasure to be able to share that. Glenn Koyama, he is working on that as we speak, so he's taking a few days off from that garden renovation project to join us here. Glenn Koyama, who's been part of this garden for many years as well, working on the waterfall up at the upper garden and working on various stone paving, paver designs with the bluestone and other works here, and doing pruning in the garden as well. It's an honor to have him be a part of not only this garden, but the Coachella Valley Garden as well. And of course, being part of the Japanese Friendship Garden San Diego, continuing the design legacy that was started by my father so many decades ago. It's a privilege for me, and I continue to do some various residential and private design and build work as well. But I didn't think that kept me busy enough, so I teach full-time at Cal Poly Pomona, where this semester I started a class, ethnic studies class, on the Japanese American experience in the California landscape. It's really is a culmination of my own experiences in being able to teach this class that starts from the late 19th century, talking about the Japanese immigrant experience, and then all the way to current times and issues as well. So I'd like to again thank Naomi Hirahara, who I had contacted earlier this year about using green makers as one of the course materials. She was very gracious in giving her permission for that book, and using also all these different type of publication online resources for that. So it's been very transformative for me to be able to share the story of the Japanese American history to the Cal Poly students. And there's also Asian Gardens class, design studios, and then a field trip to Japan that I started a couple of years ago. I was supposed to go this coming spring, but of course, with COVID, had other plans. And so hopefully the next following spring, we'll be able to take that as well. But then I also started writing a column for Changing Landscapes. It's for a publication called Nichibei Weekly, which is the editor and owner of that is Keiji Taguma. I don't know if anyone subscribes to Nichibei Weekly, but it's a really wonderful Japanese American, Asian American news publication online. So I encourage anyone who's interested to learn about those events and issues to subscribe. And then I serve on the advisory council for the California Botanic Garden, which is in Claremont, very wonderful garden with its own legacy, and I'll serve on the board of directors at the Japanese, Story Stern's Japanese Garden as well. And so there's educational and design opportunities that is all centralized with this privilege that I'm able to work with Japanese Gardens. I take with a lot of joy and gratitude. And that reminds me of a point that Naomi brought up too, just to share some news about the Dodger Stadium. I was asked to come up with a couple of concepts for that Dodger Stadium. Japanese Garden, it is in the back of their minds over there that they do have the stone lantern, that they have this legacy of a Japanese garden there. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, they put those plans on hold. For the time being, I think they would like to revisit it again. So that's some really nice positive story that the Dodger Stadium, they really take it with a sincerity that they hope to make that part of the Japanese American history, part of the Dodger Stadium experience as well. Right, so I know that we've had some overviews about the Japanese Friendship Garden history, so I won't spend too much time here. Just to point out the fact that the Japanese Garden here in Balboa Park, has a long, rich history that parallels the Japanese Gardens of North America history that goes to the late 19th, early 20th century with the 1915 Panama, California Expo. This just, like learning about how the tea house and the garden was such an iconic and popular attraction here is actually in the south part of San Diego Zoo. Right now, like they're expanding their children's zoo over at the San Diego Zoo, but that's where it originally was. But as I learned from reading Kendall Brown's publications as well in terms of the whole Sister City program that was really moving forward in the post-war era. Of course, we have San Diego with the Sister City program with Yokohama. My father was involved with the master planning process in those 70s. And then this Japanese Friendship Garden, its legacy partly, also has layers of design sensibilities incorporated at the Japanese Friendship Garden too, with landscape architect Ken Nakajima being hired after the master plan was done in the 80s to design that phase 1 portion. He named it Sankei and which means 3 sceneries, which incorporates pastoral mountains and lakes. And I was asked about the name Sankei a number of years ago and how that's embodied in the Japanese Friendship Garden here. And in many ways it is, but at the same time, I also learned that Sankei is also the name of the Yokohama garden of the Sister City program. And then the name of that original owner, Tomitaro Hara, his nickname was Sankei. So there was a little bit of that element that was a little bit surprising to me as well. I was like, they kept on referring to him as, Mr. Sankei did this. Mr. Sankei was the owner here. I was like, it all started to make sense in terms of the name, the legacy of the name there. But it was very fascinating to walk Sankei in Yokohama and seeing that it's really an outdoor museum there where he was a very affluent entrepreneur who was able to, during that early 20th century in Japan, was able to purchase structure, tea houses, pagodas, other artworks, and historic elements, and that's all across the garden. It's a very large garden, so if anyone goes to Japan, that's a really worthwhile trip to go to Yokohama. But in terms of the Sankei and here, the Japanese Friendship Garden, has its a very unique story as well. And then in the 1990s, as my father returned to revisit the Japanese Friendship Garden design with the Phase 1, in 1999, the renovations were made to the upper garden, and then how it extended to this Phase 2. So apologize for the phase numbering. Luanne have a little bit numbering distinction there. When I joined my father in the early 2000s, I just kind of kept on going with the phase numberings there. So we called this whole expansion area Phase 2, and that's when my involvement with the Japanese Friendship Garden started in the early 2000s, when we looked at expanding the garden from the 1.5 acres at the upper garden area to becoming the over 11 acres, about 12-acre garden that included this essential stream, strolling pathways, and the Inamori Pavilion as well. And then so just, I love to always give context. It's the teacher in me that likes to show like aerials and just give these little context to where we are. And you can see the Japanese Friendship Garden. In the southern portion of Balboa Park, we have the 5 freeway and the 163 coming north to south. And we have the Sparkles Pavilion right next to us. So we have a very rich San Diego history just surrounding us here with Balboa Park being such an important cultural institution here in San Diego. But then the southern portion, it's the least flat area. Balboa Park. It's very interesting that the 12 acres is in a very canyon area, and then when you usually think about gardens and parks and open space, I teach landscape grading and construction as well. We always have to talk about flattening areas for public use and for being able to do programs. So here, working with those type of grading, elevation conditions was very, they had its challenges, but then they were turned into opportunities as well, because my father really saw it as this amazing opportunity to incorporate his design sensibilities that go to Japanese garden principles of fusui. So if I move forward from the Phase 1, we're all familiar with the upper garden area. But here, this is an illustration that we did a couple of decades ago. And here's the Sparkles Pavilion to the left. And then you could see, as Kendall was alluding to, the importance of pathway connections in human spaces that tie my father's designs together. He also looked at the natural systems of the site. That means topography. That means understanding wind and water. And so whenever I worked with him, he always stressed the point of working with wind and water. How does wind and water move through space? How does it shape the landscape? And so by looking at this master plan here, from the north to the south, we have this canyon that water has shaped over time. They're dry streams right now, intermittent streams. But we have one central one that's going through from the north to the south, but also other ones from the east. And down at the bottom, there's one that's going from north to south as well. So we're all grading to the south here. And when you look at the fusui or feng shui principles, running water movement north to south, what does that mean? South exposure. South exposure means getting plenty of sunlight. But, how do you balance that with the summertime of having a lot of sun exposure and in the wintertime when it could get cold? And so when my father designed the master plan, he used that dry stream as an opportunity to incorporate the water to have that positive flow of energy, chi, that we talk about, or ki in Japanese, in terms of how we make sure that we respect those processes. That's embodied within his design concept for this Phase 2 master plan. So the pathway meanders at this ADA accessible 5% slope. If you don't slope at a 5% for pathways, you could run into legal trouble actually in public gardens. And so That's why the pathway meanders very gradually as it does, but create an opportunity to create moments along that pathway. And so we have little nooks to stop along the way, bridges that create moments like the Dragon Bridge up at the north. You have that dramatic dry waterfall and stream that in 2010, when Dr. Nakamura Tamane-san and my father were laying those rocks down. But then you go to the east, and then some other bridges, and then in the future, as we speak, talking about having a tea garden and other moments for rest and repose. To be able to have the sequence of spaces was really important in this garden expansion until we get to the bottom, where we have the Inamori Pavilion. And so you could see from this drawing, it has gone through some iterations of change, because no matter what you do on the plan, you have to let the site speak to what is proper, what is the best thing to do. So that's what Nakamura-san was alluding to, the architect, like that we moved the building. He was like, oh, that's unprecedented, because we would stake out the footprint, and then we'd be standing out here, and then my father and talking with the architect, like, oh, we have to move it. This is too tight right here. It's not going to lead to nice flow over here. So that was very fascinating to talk about that. And so we had that movement there. Really? 5 minutes? Oh, okay. And so, so with the phase 2, we went through this multi-year process of doing construction documents, like you see here, letting the site and the landscape come together. And then, but letting the site really tell us, how to shape the pathways, how to make our way down the garden. And so you could see, like, with Dennis Uesugi, he's the president of the Japanese Friendship Garden. He is a fellow of landscape architecture and has a very keen eye for not only Japanese gardens, but landscape design as well. So all working together to make sure that we're being very sensitive in bringing down the design of the garden. But then as we move forward, bringing in the central stream. So this was a big collaborative effort, working with Valley Crest, which is now Brightview, working with other professional and experts to being able to craft this large monumental project that came down the center. And then using the resources and tools like cranes to being able to put the larger plants up into this very traverse topography. We had to phase and sequence our way out from the top down to the bottom here, or else we would have been stuck in not being able to get large trees up in the larger portions of the garden. But trying to use the slopes to try to test different ways to bring in camellias, azaleas, maybe other plants that could be used for tea harvesting and tea production in the future. We tried to make a performative landscape so that we could bring some other layers of use to the landscape and garden as well. There's also a 20,000-gallon rain harvesting cistern that we put in the central portion of the garden so that we could capture rainwater from the adjacent roofs. So that we could use that for water features, because that would be the most appropriate use. There's a lot of water that gets used in the pond and stream here. And of course, our signature bridges that we have, the Dragon Bridge being built by a Japanese carpenter, Issei carpenter from the Florida. And then, but of course, we have Davi Shipos involved with creating bridges here as well. And we had a project specific be involved as well. They're located in San Gabriel Valley. But with the earthen bridge, that's just an interesting note on that is that, we had to eventually take the mondo grass out of the edges because people were jumping on the bridge and sitting on the bridge. And those were things that we didn't consider people would be doing and kept on trampling on the mondo grass. So it eventually just became a DG path. So those are the public use considerations that we have to make with Japanese gardens, because there are some incompatibilities that get made sometimes. But with the Inamori Pavilion, that was such a large effort, and without Dr. Inamori's efforts and contributions, that we really wouldn't be able to have this Japanese Friendship Garden be what it is today. A couple of pictures that I thought just to show the evolution of the shell and the back layer of how we built this garden. And then, sorry for going a little bit too long here, but just to talk a moment about the future projects that we have here. The story is not finished yet because, as Luanne alluded to, we recently were able to put a bronze statue of Kannon Bosatsu, a Bodhisattva, attendee to Buddha, up in the northeastern area. We are putting the tea garden Azumaya waiting shelter in, so that's going to be part of our demonstrations tomorrow. And then, but also children's garden in the near future, and of course, a cultural education center as well. So just a couple of photos from my angle showing that Kannon Bosatsu, amazing work that was done by the conservator, the artist, that was able to repair the statue. Amazing effort that went into that. But using digital technologies, hand drawing as well, just to help visualize how to move forward with the garden design was very important. So I would use these kind of visual aids, using elevations, using computer, iPad, so that we had a good sense of how the design would look when we installed it. And then having collaboration with the educational institutions, very important here at Japanese Friendship Garden. I am able to hold design studios here, and very thankful to the Japanese Friendship Garden for allowing me to have Cal Poly design studios here. So I had my students do some children's garden concepts over in the southern end of the Japanese Friendship Garden. And so they learned about Japanese folk tales, aesthetic traditions, garden principles, and they would use, and this class was held virtually. We had to do this via Zoom this past spring, but they did this amazing job and were very sincere in their efforts in learning about Japanese garden aesthetics and traditions, and put these kind of exhibits together so that it gives us and the Japanese Friendship Garden some ideas on how to move forward with these concepts. And so they took it to like these technical drawing levels as well, using Revit, which is a drafting tool, as well as these 3D rendering programs here. And then the tea garden, this is what we'll be doing tomorrow, showing placing some boulders for the tea garden area. But we went through this whole process of investigating will a tea house fit up in that slope. But by looking at 3D modeling and looking at the topography, we became much more modest in our efforts up there to put a Azumaya waiting shelter up there instead, to cut down on the impact on that slope right there. And so opportunities to actually have a tea room that's accessible, that's where Kelly comes in looking at the whole future phase of the Cultural Education Center right here. And currently, the Japanese Friendship Garden is working with Kelly Sutherland McLeod's office to master plan and think about how to proceed with this Cultural Education Center. What does it want to be? What does the shape want to be? What is its form? How is it going to relate to the landscape? And then the programming that is involved in such a monumental feat, as well. And I know that we ran over, so I'm not sure if we have a minute for Kelly to share, but...
we have a few minutes for question and answer.
Okay. And so, so with that, just showing a couple of exhibits graphics here. So during the Q&A opportunity, if you'd like us to kind of build upon like how this is just graphics and conversation we were having as we speak on how the buildings for the Cultural Education Center, we're looking at right next to the old administration building, which is, we call the exhibit room building, and then the ceremonial building, gate that we have at the southern end, where the Friendship Plaza is. And so that's where we are looking at putting this very amazing, sustainable Cultural Education Center up at that southern point. And I apologize for going over a few minutes on that point, but hopefully if you have questions on this, we could bring Kelly up to talk about these points about the programming and the efforts that are going into this center as well. And with that, the story does continue here. We're very excited for not only the next couple of years for the Japanese Friendship Garden, but for decades to come. Thank you.